And I think we should be live. Let me give it a minute just to check that you guys are here. And yes, I can see the number, so we are officially live. What did I miss? Oh, 78 episodes. Wow. Yeah, I've still not watched any. Of Outlander we're talking about, just in case if anyone was not following the chat. Hi Katie, welcome. So we've got 2 minutes before to officially get started. We are in West Norwood Cemetery and it is nearly 5 p.m. UK time. That does mean that if you see me talking too much at the end of the tour, you have to tell me to move my bum because it's closing at 6, the cemetery. So we don't want to be locked in with the dead. So if you see that at 5:02 I'm still chatting away, do let me know. Oh, Lynn, nice to have you along. Hi, Mary, welcome. You'll see a bit of the Greek cemetery today. So you might feel like home. Hi, Martin from Canada, welcome. Yeah, locked in with the dead. I have a secret. I did eat a few wild berries from down there. I was scared before of eating anything that grew out of the dead. Well, dead, long dead here, but I just did it. It's actually very early. It's July. Usually they arrive in August, those little wild berries. Oh no, I don't want to sleep with the dead. No, thank you. Oh, no worries, Laurie. I am still experimenting because the thing is that I don't know how long this is gonna work, because the thing is with Hego I could redo a tour several times and still have people. On YouTube, I've not yet redone a tour, see if I can still make a bit of money the second time around. So we'll see how it goes. But for now, I have no intention to quit. Anyway, it's officially time to go. So welcome, Herbivore. Nice seeing you here. So welcome to West Norwood Cemetery. Just a bit of housekeeping as usual. Yeah, I should do Jack the Ripper again. I should do it again soon. You've got the chat. Feel free to use it. Ask me any questions you might have. If I don't see any of your questions, don't be shy. Try again. And for the ones that don't know me, I'm Nathalie. Right, let's go. So we are in West Norwood Cemetery. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, we now have a little, you might see the little dollar button at the bottom of the chat. So that is to leave me a tip. That's very new, I've not had any tips yet, so I'd like to see how it goes. But just bear in mind that it's actually still better for me if you use PayPal or Buy Me a Coffee, because Google would take 30% of those tips. And I might have to pay some taxes in the United States. I've not done the papers yet because it's very complicated, so I wanted to ask for advice. But yeah, it's still better for me through Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal if you have to choose. Anyway, let's go. So we are in West Norwood Cemetery. Now, some of you might ask me, why is it called West Norwood? Because we are in South London. We are on the way towards Croydon. And well, it's actually called West Norwood because of a medieval forest that used to be here. It was called the Great Northwood, north because it was north of Croydon, which was the main village at the time. And that medieval forest was used for hunting, it was used for timber as well, and it was very, very big. If you looked at the London map today, the leftover of the Great Northwood, it's Crystal Palace Park, Nunhead Cemetery, West Norwood Cemetery. And if you looked at the names all across South London, you see some remnants of that forest. For example, Penge, the name Penge. It actually means edges of the forest, Forest Hill, South Norwood. To an extent, Denmark Hill, because Denmark Hill is named after the Prince of Denmark that married Queen Anne, and he used to go hunting in the Great Norwood. So that influenced a lot of the names in South London. And the cemetery was originally called the South Metropolitan Cemetery. It opened in 1837, so it was the second one of the magnificent 7 cemetery. Some of them we've explored in my tours. We've got Abney Park, we've got Brompton. I should do Brompton soon. We've got Nunhead, Tower Hamlet, and of course West Norwood, which is probably my favorite. It was also nicknamed the Millionaire Cemetery at the time because some of the monuments here are quite impressive, like this one here. That's a mausoleum for one person. Well, it was built for a family, but the chap didn't really get along with his family too much, so he's actually buried alone. His name is Edmund Maddick, and if you looked inside, it is massive. I mean, this is bigger than where I live. So yes, some of the monuments here are quite impressive. And well, most of you already know the story behind those magnificent commercial cemeteries. It is that through the Industrial Revolution, London struggled to cope with the number of dead bodies because of the Industrial Revolution. A lot of people moved into London, and there was hardly enough space for the living, let alone the dead. A lot of those little graveyards around the churches were completely saturated. The grave diggers were paid by the foot, the deeper the better, so you could fit more people in there. Often you were buried, but a few months later they had to open the grave, chop your body to make some space, sometimes even dispose of body parts. So they had to find a solution, and those graveyards, they had become very smelly. Ladies didn't go into the graveyards anymore. I don't get it. Foot measurement or foot body part. I think I've missed something. And the monument in the middle, by the way, that's Byzantine style. And so yeah, those graveyards were completely saturated, so they had to find a solution. And the solution came with the creation of those amazing commercial cemeteries on what was at the time the outskirts of London. Oh yes, okay, yes, they were paid by the foot measurement, yeah. They were not stealing the body parts. Some people were, but that would have been the body snatchers, not the grave robbers, not the grave diggers. Although sometimes they were the same people. Anyway, this beautiful monument here, it probably reminds you of a beauty spot in England. This is made to make you think of Stonehenge. It's because it's the tomb of a writer, John Britton. He wrote about the beauties of England, so that's why they made a monument that looks like one of the great beauties of England. And let me show you my favorite monument. It's this one here. It's a Gothic style, and it belongs to a chap that you might not have heard of. His name is James William Gilbert. He was the manager of a bank called the London and Westminster Bank. You might still know it today. Today it's known as NatWest. And it is my favorite because of the little squirrel. I don't know if you can see the little squirrel up there. Squirrels are a great symbol of banking because, well, you know, they often grab the nuts and then they hide them for later. So they're basically banking their nuts away. So I think that's quite cute that he's included a little symbol of his job on the monument. And he's also known for you might have noticed in Northern America, you spell check, you know, the bank checks, you spell it like a check, you know, CHECK. In British English, we spell it the French way with QUE at the end. That's because of him, because he was also writing about banking and he made the spelling of check the French way for some reason. Anyway, time to tell you about my favorite person being buried here. Well, he's not my favorite, but he's the most intriguing of the people buried here. His name is Charles Bravo. Charles Bravo was the victim of a fascinating Victorian murder mystery. It's literally like a play of Cluedo. And before to tell you about Charles, I need to tell you a bit more about his wife, Florence Bravo, born Campbell. Florence was from a family from high society, you know, a wealthy family, and squirrel away money. Yeah. And well, you know, at the time when you were born in a wealthy family, you were almost seen as an asset, you know. Not that you would have to go through a properly arranged wedding or marriage, but you were expected to do a good marriage. You were expected to marry someone rich that would be a good prospect for the family. And that's what happened to Florence. She met a young man called Alexander. He was a grenadier guard, you know, like the Queen's Guard, and he was from a very rich family. She found him very attractive, so that was all good. They fairly quickly got married, and she convinced him of leaving his job in the army because, you know, if you want to start a family, you want to be home, right? And as he left the army, he struggled to find a purpose for his life, and he became very violent with Florence, and he had a problem with alcohol. And at the time, divorce was out of, you know, it just wasn't an option for a young lady from high society. It was mission impossible for a lady to get a divorce anyway. Even adultery alone would not have been enough. You needed something more, like, you know, bestiality or whatever it might be. And yeah, I love the color of this one, Michelle. And, you know, she couldn't stay with a violent husband. She went into depression. She kept running away from him, going down to Brighton. And her parents wanted her to make it work. At the time, you had to, you know, you had to stick with your husband, you know, whatever happened. And eventually her parents, they agreed to send her to some kind of a retreat at the Welsh border, with a very renowned doctor called Dr. James Gurley. He was a very progressive doctor. He believed that, you know, at the time, with ladies' problems, they were, you know, considered like hysterical and stuff, and ladies' issues were only ladies' issue. Gurley believed that there was a bit too much pressure on ladies to be a perfect housewives, you know, and all that. And he had this kind of a retreat, and when Florence got there, she felt way better. She did not need any drugs to go to sleep anymore. She became quite close to Dr. Gurley. He was 37 years her senior, and well, he made her feel so good that they became they started an affair. And she's still married at that point. She's still with Alexander, but Alexander is living with his mistress anyway. So the affair was, if the affair came out, it would have been extremely scandalous at the time. And at that point, her husband, Alexander, dies. At the time, they didn't see anything suspicious with that death. He was living with his mistress anyway. She wasn't around. Probably alcohol poisoning. But he did not have time to change his will. So a massive fortune came to Florence. 40,000 pounds at the time. It's a lot of money. So she was fairly lucky because, you know, she got rid of a violent husband and she got a lot of money. With that money, she bought a house in Balham. Maybe I should take you to Balham one day. A large building called the Priory. It is still there today. Actually, you know what? There's the building now has been divided into many little flats, and there's one bedroom available. I've just found it on Spare Room just before to go on holiday last week. 750, I think I've got a screenshot, hold on, let me show you. It's a gay flat share, one gay boy and one lesbian. Yeah, 750 for this little bedroom in the Priory. Let me show you the Priory. So that's the very building that Florence bought. I was gonna ring them to come for a viewing, but that was literally the day before I went on holiday. I wanted to go inside and do a little video into the murder house, but that would not be nice. I'm a good girl, I shouldn't do this type of things. Anyway, so she bought the Priory, and she hired a lot of staff, a lady of company. And a lady of company, it's basically what the name says. It's a lady that's a servant, but they are there to keep you company, basically. She also hired a coachman and a lot more servants. We are now on Ship Pass. Are we still here? The chat is very quiet suddenly. I'm just wondering if we might have had a little drop in signal or something. Okay, we're still good. I can see Rose. Welcome, Rose. I'll show you later on why this is called Ship Pass. And so she hires a lot of staff, and she's still with Dr. Gully. The affair nearly got caught a first time when they were basically at it in the bedroom when one of the servants opened the door and saw them. At that point, Florence dressed up and she ran after the servant. She paid her a lot of money to avoid the scandal and stay quiet. And let me show you another. Let me show you Florence. So there is Florence. And then eventually they did get caught. They were invited into a house in Surrey that belonged to some solicitors. Thank you, Christopher. And Dr. Gully came along. And Gully was also married, by the way, but his wife was 14 years his senior, and she was living in some kind of a care home. So he lived like a bachelor, basically. And in that house where there were guests in Surrey, at some point the host opens the parlor, and the two of them were having sex on the sofa, his sofa. So the affair came out, and that, you know, at the time in the eyes of society, if you were not married and you know, you were a loose woman. A loose woman was a woman that did not wear a corset. And she became, you know, there were a lot of pamphlets calling her a gay woman. Gay at the time meant promiscuous, you know. And really, her reputation was terribly damaged. So was the reputation of Dr. Gully. That was a very prestigious doctor. He had treated Charles Darwin and very important people like that. And at that very timing, she found herself pregnant with Dr. Gully, which is, well, really the worst thing that could happen to her at that moment. So the decision to have an illegal abortion was pretty much done by society, you know. Dr. Gully performed an illegal abortion on Florence, and she did recover, but she was not very well, and then she decided to finish the affair with Dr. Gully. She did tell him she loved him, and if maybe one day the circumstances were a bit different, maybe, but she finished it. And Jane Cox, the servant, the lady of company, she grew to be a very good friend with Florence. And she tried to help by engineering a meeting between Florence and a young man called Charles Bravo. She knew Bravo from Jamaica, and let me show you Charles. He was a lawyer. He wanted to get into Parliament, and he had a lot of debts. So he was quite interested into Florence because, well, she had money. At the time when you married, if you were a lady, all your money, everything would belong to your husband, you know. The dynamic between men and women was very, very different. Well, they had just passed a new law that ladies could kind of keep their share, and actually Florence went for that. Bear with me over here if I'm a little bit slow in the story, because let me show you where I'm stepping into. When you come and visit those Magnificent Seven, do be careful. You're not really meant to go off the beaten path, because the floor is not always very stable. So yeah, I'm gonna try to be very careful. So she met Bravo. She liked him very much. She decided to be honest with him, though. She decided to tell him that her reputation had been tarnished, that she had had an affair. And Bravo said to her, yeah, me too, I've had an affair. Actually, he had an illegitimate child in the Midlands. I don't know if I've taken the easiest way. I found another way earlier. Let's do this. And well, she fell pregnant again, so they had to marry anyway. And it was quite kind of an odd marriage, to be honest, because quite clearly she was with him for a whitewash. She needed to regain her reputation. Be careful not to fall into a grave. Yes, that's exactly what could happen, Mary. Some of those graves are kind of collapsed. And when you can see where you're stepping, it's okay. But when you don't see, that's the risk. Yeah. So luckily, if that was to happen, there's a lot of witnesses here. So you could call someone to save me. And so yeah, interesting marriage, those two, because he wanted her money, she wanted to regain her reputation, and she had a miscarriage. And quickly she got pregnant again, and she had another miscarriage. Bravo was violent with her, from what we know. But when I say violent, you know, the dynamic between men and women at the time was really, really... I've just stepped in my foot just went like 30 centimeters down into the mud. At the time... Well, actually, I might as well tell you. When I say violent, because of her medical records, we think he was forcing her into quite a lot of anal sex. But at the time, it was absolutely fine to do that to your wife. You know, you could do whatever you wanted in the marital relationship. And one day, after her second miscarriage, after she had been recovering for a few weeks, so Charles was going to come back into the marital bedroom, because she had kind of kicked him away for a few weeks as she was trying to recover from the second miscarriage. And this is the grave, by the way. This is Charles Turner Bravo. That day, Charles went for a ride on his horse, and his horse bolted, so he was a bit unwell. And when he came home, he had a bit of alcohol. So did Florence. She had started to have a bit of an issue with alcohol, really. They had dinner together. Then Florence went to bed, and she asked the servant for more wine. Charles was not impressed. They had a bit of an argument. And let's go back. And Charles went into his bedroom. He had a sip of water from the jug on his bedside table. Well, at least that's what we think happened. He would do that every night. Everyone knew that he had a sip of water every night before to go to bed. And a few minutes later, Charles is screaming, "Florence, Florence, hot water, hot water." went to assist and Mrs. Cox went to help him, always in the presence of Marianne, the other servant. And Charles is vomiting through the window, he's terribly unwell. Jane Cox calls a doctor, but she calls a doctor that lives an hour away. Was she trying to kill time, or was she just, I think it's better this way, or was she just not thinking properly? Who knows? And eventually Florence wakes up, she runs to her husband. There's nothing suspicious at all in the behavior of Florence. She was like, oh, why did you call that doctor? Let's call another doctor that lives much more closer. So the other doctor arrives first. Charles is in and out of consciousness for the next 54 hours. And at no point did he scream poison or murder or anything. He was quite chilled. I'm stuck here. He was quite chilled about his own passing, really. And actually, I'm struggling here. One of the doctors that was invited, you might have heard of him if you followed my Jack the Ripper tour. His name is William Gull. Not to be confused with Gully. James Gully is the other one. William Gull was a famous physician. He was the physician of the Queen. And later on in his life, some have speculated that he might have been Jack the Ripper. Very completely far-fetched, but is the man. And actually, William Gull was the only one out of the 6 doctors that was pretty much convinced that Charles tried to kill himself. Because he did ask Charles when he was in a moment of consciousness, he was like, what have you taken? You need to tell us what you've taken, because this looks like poisoning. If you were to die, there will be a murder inquiry here. And Charles said, nothing, just laudanum. I have taken laudanum, a painkiller based with morphia for his teeth, but nothing else. And William Gull was like, no, this is not the effects of laudanum. So you need to tell us what you've taken, otherwise this is going to be trouble. And Charles said, if it's not laudanum, then I don't know what it is. So, he was quite relaxed. So that's why some people believed that he might have done that to himself. Now, after 54 hours, finally he passed away. And it's still a major mystery today. There was an inquest. The first inquest was held at the Priory, because Florence, she had a lot of friends from high society, and usually the public inquests were held in a public place, but it didn't have to be. The first inquest concluded that basically they didn't know, but no one was satisfied with that, so they did a second inquest. The second inquest concluded murder by person unknown. There was not enough evidence to convince anybody. They did find traces of poison though. Tartar emetic, also known as antimony. Yeah, laudanum would make him relax, but no vomit, and certainly not killing him. And they did find traces of the antimony. The antimony, and then know how much. It's basically 10 times the amount that would be sufficient to kill somebody. Now, tartar emetic was used in the Victorian pharmacy. The Victorian pharmacy was full of poisons. The tartar emetic would be used for two main reasons. One for the livestock. You might give it to your horses or whatever if you wanted to make them vomit. Or you could also use it in tiny quantities if you wanted to put your partner out of alcohol. If you wanted to put them off alcohol, if you dropped a few grains of antimony into their drinks, then that would make them feel sick, and then they would not fancy any more of that drink, at least for that night. Quick pause in the story. This is Sir Horace Jones. He's the architect of the Tower Bridge, as well as the Leadenhall Market, the Smithfield Market, the Billingsgate Market. So amazing architecture. And so yeah, it could, so there are a few different theories really. It could have been a suicide. He had no reason to kill himself. He had just married a very rich wife. Everything theory. The second theory, it's actually accident. You know, maybe Florence was slowly poisoning him. Some have claimed that some ladies did that to their husband to kind of slow down their sexual desire. Florence did have 2 miscarriages. She knew very well that another pregnancy could maybe kill her. So it is possible. It's a weird way to do it, but who knows? And she might have dropped a bit too much because she was drunk that night. It is possible. And the third option is, of course, murder. But if it was murder, who did it? Now, what I did not mention is that at the beginning of their marriage, Charles was receiving some anonymous letters accusing him of being a gold digger. And he was convinced it was Dr. Gully. Dr. Gully he seemed to be very much still in love with Florence. And Dr. Gully had been seen the week prior to the event 5 times with Mrs. Cox, when those two had nothing to do together once, you know, the affair was finished with Florence. And apparently Mrs. Cox did tell him about at Jane Cox's place in Notting Hill. According to one witness, there was a little poison sign on the bottle, but those bottles were never to be found. So it could have been Dr. Gully with Jane Cox. Jane, she does have a motive. Bravo had been, I'm showing you the grave here, I'm not even telling you why. This is why the avenue is called the Ship. This is the grave of John Wilmot. He was a captain, one of those Victorian trading boats. And he had his wife with him. There were no ladies on board usually, but the captain was allowed to hire his wife. He was at sea for 32 years. And so yeah, back to Bravo. Yeah, he wanted to be in charge of the finances of the couple, which was not going down well with Florence because it was her money. And he had fired Jane Cox. And he gave her a few months to find a new job on everything. But, you know, that was not going to go down well because the girls had grown up very close to one another. And so that would give her a motive. But did Jane Cox do it alone? No, I don't think so. Although she had 3 boys to feed and she lost her job, she was actually inherit a lot of money from Jamaica. She knew that her aunt was going to die in a few months. So she wouldn't have done all of that for money. Now, would she have done that with Florence? Oh yeah, that's very possible. Or did Florence do it alone and then Jane Cox got into it somehow and she decided, because of loyalty, she decided to help? Yes, that's very possible because the vomit had been cleaned. And if the poison, we believe the poison was in the jug of water, that very jug of water had been cleaned as well. Because a few hours later, one of the doctors actually, he was a bit thirsty and he drank some water from that very jug. And he was very much alive. So someone, it could have been Charles himself, you know, he could have cleaned the jug and he could have cleaned the vomit before the doctors arrived. Who knows? Anyway, while we're here, see those graves here, they're amazing monuments. They would have at the time had a prime spot because this was an alleyway. So those plots would be much more expensive because you were on the main road. But you know, space is money, so that did not last long. Then the cemetery sold those spots as well. That's why the name Ship Pass is all the way down here, because that was the end of the road. And those 2 monuments, that one has been refurbished. It's been repainted. This is actually cast iron, so it doesn't look like it on camera, but it's not actually stone. And this one here, it's from Edward Middleton Barry, the son of Charles Barry, the guy that built Parliament. Let me show you the little details. It's from a merchant. They've got, that was their company, Behrens and Bloomsberg. So that's why they've got the 2B. And the bear was the family crest. And let's go down to have a look at Miss Beaton as well. You might know Miss Beaton from the cookery books. She was teaching you how to be a perfect Victorian lady. She was in the household management of English Woman Domestic Magazine and all that. So there she is, Miss Beaton, with her husband. And anyway, to come back to the Bravo case, Jane alone, personally, I don't think it's possible. But Jane and Florence, yes, that's absolutely possible. And when the doctors came, Florence did tell them, "Oh, he's told me he's taken the poison not to tell Florence." And then the doctors were like, "Why did you not tell that earlier?" And she said, yeah, I did. And then the doctors were like, "No, you didn't say that." So there are some evidence that Jane definitely lied. Did she lie to protect Florence? Or maybe to protect Charles? We don't know that. But after the affair, so no one was judged guilty, but all those lives were completely ruined. Dr. Gully could not recover his reputation, so he moved to Austria. Florence and Jane Cox, they kind of splitted. Florence moved on to Southsea next to Portsmouth, and she died 2 years later, alcohol poisoning. She did say through the inquest that she was not going to survive this, and she was absolutely right. The fact that those two that were so close together earlier, Jane and Florence, the fact that they were no longer in touch after the inquest, for me, it kind of proves that something happened between them two. You know, did Jane Cox kind of helped Florence to cover up, and then she hated her for bringing her into that horrible mess? Who knows? Who knows? And let me show you while we're here this grave here. That's a lovely monument. It's you might see the name Sir Thomas Gabriel Baronet. He was one of the Lord Mayor of London, but his father-in-law is also buried in there with him. His father-in-law is basically the guy that invented the underground. He did not really create the underground, but 20 years earlier, he wrote a pamphlet about how amazing it would be to have a system underground, bringing the working classes along the Fleet River down to work. And 20 years later, they did it. His name was Charles Pearson. So technically, he had the idea behind the system. That monument here has been redone as well since I last came. I think they've changed some of the stones. They've repainted Spurgeon face. So there are a lot of maintenance. There's a group called the Friends of West Norwood. They do an amazing job here, keeping the place in a great state. It might look a bit run-down to you, but because it's also used as a nature reserve. So, for example, you've got a lot of decaying wood and stuff, because that's great for the invertebrates and many different species. And this mausoleum here, it's for a gentleman that you might have heard of, Henry Tate. Henry Tate was a grocer from Liverpool. He made a fortune by commercializing the sugar cubes. Before that, sugar was always in bags, and he did not really invent the system. The system was actually invented in Switzerland, I believe, by a guy from Czech Republic. But he commercialized it here. He made a fortune, and before to die, he decided to give his collection. He had accumulated a massive collection of art. This one is a bit scary because you can see the coffins. He had accumulated a massive collection of art, and he decided to donate it to the nation. The government kind of snubbed him. They were like, oh, thank you very much, that's lovely of you, but we also need a building. So he gave £80,000 for a building, and then government was like, oh, thank you, that's lovely of you, but we also need the land. And then he was like, no, that's enough. And that's how they ended up using the site of Millbank Prison in Pimlico. Because it was a former prison, it already belonged to government. So that was the first state. And the second state is the one on the South Bank in a former power station. And if you see the little terracotta building in the middle there, that's Doulton, the famous terracotta supplier. Anyway, to come back to the Bravo case, I've not told you my favorite theory. I think it might have been the other way around. I think it might have been Charles poisoning Florence. We do know that with antimony poisoning, you have some uteral consequences and discharge and stuff like that. And she had 2 terrible miscarriages, and that could be linked. Oh, did you see the green little parakeet? Let's wait and see if we see any more. So yeah, I suspect he might have been poisoning her. Very, very slow quantities, maybe to stop her from drinking, or maybe to get some inheritance, because he's the one that wanted the money, and maybe he's drunk on it by mistake. And when he realized he messed up, he could never admit it. So that would explain why he might have actually told Jane Cox that he took the poison, why he might have cleaned the jug of water to not leave any evidence. And also the containers were never to be found. And why for 54 hours he was so chilled about his own death, because he knew he had taken it. Although some might argue that antimony poisoning, it kind of affects your brain as well. So you might feel a bit like, doopy. So you might not really, realize that you're dying. Who knows? While we're here, let me show you this one here. I don't know who that guy is, but you can see they've tried to steal the bronze here. Through the first lockdown, there was a lot of vandalism, sadly, in this cemetery. Apparently, it was horrible. Some body limbs were out of the ground, and it was a disaster, really. And you can see they've tried to steal the bronze. Honestly, stealing from the dead. Even the little plaques, when they have the people that are cremated, they have the little plaques with the name, and they used to have a little bronze holder to hold the plaque. Those were stolen as well. So they had to replace them with plastic. That's very sad. Anyway, let's go and take a look at the Greek cemetery. So, and I need to speed up a little bit because it's already 20 to 6. The Greeks, what happened is there was a massacre through the Greek Wars of Independence, the massacre of Chios. And after that, a lot of Greeks moved into London. And a lot of them settled here. In Tulsa, actually, still today, there's a bit of a Greek community. And in 1842, one of them decided to take the lease on this part of the cemetery here. Those Victorian commercial cemeteries, they're not consecrated by the Church of England everywhere. There's always a space for dissenter or other religion. So they've taken the lease here and they've decided to do a Greek cemetery. So that's quite cool. Some of the names have been translated into English, and some are still written in Greek. The chapel is quite cool, but it's still in refurbishment, so there's nothing to see at the moment. It looks almost like a mini Parthenon, but it's been in refurbishment for at least a year now. And let me show you my favorite one. There's a beautiful one down there with a mosaic. Let me show you. I'm gonna have to climb up. There we go. That one is beautiful. I don't know who they are, but beautiful. And anyway, let's go back to the main way. So the cemetery today is no longer open to new burials. Although if you could prove that one of the plots still belong to your family, then technically they have to accept to bury you. But usually when you buy a grave, it's usually 75 years anyway, the rights. So there are very few that can still claim to have a right to be buried here. Hello Sam, welcome. And some of the monuments you might see, they're no longer all straight or very well taken care of, but that's the beauty of it. It's like, it's a cemetery as well as a nature reserve and a park. And already at the time of the Victorians, it was built to be enjoyed as a park. Those Victorians, they actually loved, they were able somehow to find a beauty into death. I know it's a bit weird, but we tend to think that those Victorians were a bit obsessed by death. I think it's the other way around. I think today we are completely death phobic. We don't want to see it, we don't want to talk about it. When those Victorians were able to somehow find some kind of a beauty into death and all the death rituals and burials and all that. And the cemeteries were a place where you would come for picnic on a Sunday, you know. And for ladies, you know, those ladies from high society, they were not really meant to go anywhere unchaperoned, apart from the graveyards. So that was also apparently a place to pull. If you wanted to come and chat up your future husband, you might as well go to the cemetery. From here it's harder to see because it's very green at the moment, but there's a bit of a hill there. I don't know if you can see the houses in the background. This is a 2-story house. The level of the ground here is actually coming all the way till the first floor of the building. That is because this is the area with the pauper's grave and the communal graves. So they basically were stacking up those bodies on top of one another. So the level of the ground was raised up. The pauper's grave, we also always say paupers and common grave. It's not the same. A common grave, you'd pay. They'll open a grave, they'll put your casket down, they'll put another 10 people on top of you, and then they'll close the grave. So it was a cheap burial, but you'd pay. That monument here is very interesting. It looks like a rock, you know. I've not been able to find any information about them, Sarah and Charles, but yeah, interesting monument. So yeah, the communal graves, you'd pay. The pauper's grave, they were the same as the communal grave, but they were actually paid by the parish. So that was only for people that could really not afford their own burials. So that was an absolute shame for the family if you could not even bury your dead. So that was slightly different. And anyway, that's gonna be the end of the tour. I'm gonna show you my face again, but I'll keep walking towards the exit. Oh, we're okay. We've got 10 minutes. Do let me know if you have any questions for me before we go. Or if you have any theory in the Bravo case. If any of you are watching this on replay and you did have a favorite suspect in the Bravo case, do let me know in the comments as well. Beautiful rose here. Thanks Tish, thanks Rose, thanks Sam for coming. Thank you for still supporting live virtual tours. And if you want to see a bit more of me, is it Monday? No, Wednesday. Wednesday we're going to Leicester Square on the Monopoly board. I know it's an early one if you are in Northern America, but the thing with Leicester Square is that I had to do it in the morning because, after 11 a.m. there's always buskers there, so they're playing live music. And the thing with music on YouTube is that they can, so if I have any copyright claims, not a claim is not that bad, but if I have any copyright strike, they can stop me from streaming for 90 days. So I don't want to take the risk. So hopefully if I go at 10:30 a.m. there shouldn't be any buskers yet. And also it's going to be much more quiet, so I can show you Harry Potter and Mr. Bean on all those amazing statues. And I have found some very interesting properties already. One of them has some height limitations, and it's still quite expensive when it's technically only okay for me and short people. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, I don't want to risk it. It's well, the restriction, it's only if you get caught with copyright when you are live streaming. Yeah, so it's very strict, and to me it doesn't make sense, you know, because clearly when you're streaming on the street, music can be anywhere. So yeah, I don't. It happened to me in Eastbourne, and luckily on the video we didn't actually hear much of the music. So sometimes it might be okay, but I don't want to take the risk. So even if it's a bit early, if you have to watch it on replay, it's fine. Cool. I don't see any more questions. Oh, cool. Thank you, Lynn. And hopefully I'll see some of you on Wednesday. Thank you, Herbivore. And yeah, I should get working on doing Brompton, because I think Brompton is closing at 8 through the summer. So that'll be quite cool to take you to Brompton Cemetery at 7 or something. Anyway, have a great evening, a great morning, a great lunch, a great night, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. And I'll see you soon. And if any of you drop me a little tip, thank you very much. I cannot thank you live because I don't see them live, but do make sure you are very much appreciated. Anyway, see you soon. Bye bye.